Okay, I bought this 2010 Toyota Corolla to flip. I got it at a low price. The previous owner was complaining about the transmission, and what she was saying is that it kept leaking oil. As it turns out, it was this seal here. It goes on one of the CV shafts on the transmission. It would go just like that, and this is a part here that plugs into the transmission. She had the dealer change this seal a couple times, and it was still leaking. Now when I picked up the car, what I noticed is it drove fine, except when I let off the gas. When I let off the gas, you would hear a howling sound coming from the transmission. Otherwise, when I was either coasting with kind of a neutral throttle setting, or when I was accelerating, it seemed perfectly fine. Usually if a seal goes bad, and it's been installed properly, you can see this one is still round. It was installed properly. There's something else wrong. In this case, the bearings for the carrier had gone bad, and you can see right there there's some damage, and that actually extends all the way around. That's the outer race, and here's the inner race. And in just a moment I'm going to show you how and why that bearing was bad. We've removed the transmission from the car. Here it is. The torque converter goes right in here. So one of the axle shafts plugs in here, and then the other one plugs in from the back side here. I've already taken this apart. There's a few bolts in here and then a few around the outside here, and it easily, this top cover comes off pretty easily. So in here, this is where the torque converter splines on. You have the oil pump. All the clutch packs and planetary gears and things are down inside of there. The valve body's underneath the oil pan here. And then this comes up to the final drive. That's basically your pinion gear. And then we have the carrier where the problem was. So if I pull this carrier out, that bearing race that we looked at earlier came right out of here. And underneath that is a shim. And that shim is what we use to control the preload on the carrier. So when I first took this apart, I noticed the bearings were bad. I ordered new bearings, got the new bearings. They're already installed on the carrier actually. I put this back together. I put the cover on, bolted it down, and I couldn't turn this. It was way too tight. I even put like a screwdriver in there and tried to turn it and still couldn't turn it. So I got looking at this transmission, and it became obvious down here somebody spray painted it with aluminum colored spray paint. That means that somebody's probably rebuilt this transmission, and when they put it back together they put the wrong shim in there. It was too tight, and that's what caused the bearing to fail. So now I'm going to show you the right way to put this together so that preload is just right. So the first step to repairing this is to remove the carrier. I removed the old bearings, both of them, put new ones on, and in order to set the preload, I need to eliminate any extra friction. So what I did is I took the ring gear off. And it's kind of a pain in the butt because you have to install the race, which you have to tap it in with a hammer or something. It fits kind of tight. So you start with guessing. First thing I did was measured the original shim, which is this one here, and it came in at about 95 thousandths of an inch thick. And you can buy these shims in 2 or 1/2 millimeter increments. That's about 2 thousandths of an inch between each size of shim. And so I went a few sizes smaller to start with, put it in there, installed the race, put the carrier in, put the cover back on, bolted it down, and then I could see how hard it was to turn this carrier. Now usually when you're setting preload on bearings similar to this, it should take about 13 to 16 inch-pounds of resistance to turn the carrier. So I've got a torque wrench here, and I've made an adapter that I can plug into the carrier there, and then try to turn it and see what the resistance is. I set up a lot of bearings nowadays. I don't even use this anymore. I just go with how it feels, and I can tell how much resistance there is by turning the screwdriver and feeling it. Took a few tries. So the original shim was 95 thousandths of an inch thick, and the one I'm using now is around 84 thousandths of an inch thick. So they had way too much preload on this, and that's why the bearings wore out really fast. We brought the carrier over to the bench here. We're going to reinstall the ring gear as the next step of putting this thing back together. So the ring gear sits down, the carrier slips into it, and then we have these locking tabs, and I put a little bit of red Loctite on the bolts to help keep them from coming loose in any way. So we'll just put all those bolts in loosely, make sure the gear is lined up right. Okay, so we've just brought it back from the vise. I've tightened all those down with the torque wrench. The next step is to just fold all these tabs back up against the bolt. That'll help keep the bolt from working out. Now these didn't have Loctite on them from the factory or from whoever rebuilt this transmission. I've put Loctite on just as kind of an extra precaution to keep those bolts from coming out. Here we are back at the transmission. We've got the carrier all ready to go. The shim is installed. We've got the new race installed. Also, while it's really easy to do, we've gone ahead and installed a new torque converter sill. And so the next step is to put the carrier in. That fits in just like that. And after that, we need to put some sealant on the case. I'm just going to use this ultra gray stuff. Works really well. There's a lot of those different silicones out there. You got the blues and the reds and the clears and blacks and different things. The thing to do is to give up on all those and go with either ultra gray or ultra black. There's something different about these. They're a lot higher quality. They're slightly more expensive, but they work much better. And you can use one kind of silicone for everything. You don't need a bunch of different colors of silicone. So what I'm going to do is put a small bead all the way around this. Once that's done, I've got a new oil pump seal that's going to go right there. And then the case is just going to, the front case is just going to go on like that, and I'll bolt it down. Those bolts are probably torqued to 13 foot-pounds. They don't need to be very tight. One of the last things we're going to do before we install this transmission in a car is put in the new seals. They're really easy to put in right now for the CV shafts. So what I've done is I've found a socket that's about the right size. I'm going to go ahead and just tap that in there gently and make sure it goes in straight so we don't bend it in any way. I've also put a little bit of oil around the inside of the sill so that it's not dry when we put the axle in there. I'm just checking to make sure that it's evenly pressed in all the way around, and that's about it right there. Okay, so we've gone ahead and installed the other sill for the other CV shaft on the other side. Last thing we need to do with this transmission before we install it is put the torque converter in. There's two sets of splines that the torque converter needs to engage on, and deep inside of there you can see there's two notches cut out of that on the torque converter. Those engage in the oil pump. So there's three things total we need to engage as we put this together. So what I'm going to do is first is just put it on. And then if we turn it, we can slowly engage it in the other parts. Sometimes you got to wiggle it around a little bit. There's one of them. There's another. And I believe we've got all three of them engaged now. Turns pretty smoothly. We've lost a small amount of oil out of there. No big deal, just kind of a little bit of a mess. And that's it. This transmission is now ready to install in the car. We've finished putting the transmission back together. We're out of time for today. We're going to install this transmission probably tomorrow. So all said and done, for the bearings and seals and the shims that I had to put in the transmission, I probably spent somewhere around $100 to $150. That was probably closer to $100. The dealer quoted the person $3,000 for a new transmission. When I looked online, I could find a used one, kind of a high mile one, in the $600 range by the time it was shipped to me. So we've actually saved, as long as this thing works, we've saved quite a bit of money by just replacing the bearings and fixing that part of it ourselves. So we'll get this thing installed tomorrow. We'll take it for a test drive and we'll see how it works.